Okay, good morning. Thank you all again for joining us for our session on breaking down recipe development and costing. For those of you that I have not met, my name is Robert Penry, and I am a graduate of Johnson & Wales University. I was part of the first graduating class of 2008 here from our Charlotte, North Carolina campus, and I received my associate's degree in culinary arts, my bachelor's degree in food service management, and a few years ago, I also completed my master's of business administration with a concentration in hospitality. I worked in the food service industry in some form or fashion for many years, ranging anywhere from fast food all the way up to corporate executive fine dining. But for the past 11 years, I've worked here for Johnson & Wales University in the admissions office. My first position, I was one of our high school culinary demonstrators, and in that position, I got to travel all across the southeastern United States. I pretty much lived in hotels for about 9 months a year, and I would visit schools each day, talking to students and also doing cooking demonstrations. Back in 2015, I decided that I had spent enough of my life living out of hotel rooms, and I wanted to spend a little bit more of my time here on campus and at home in Charlotte. So I now currently am an admissions officer with a focus on the College of Food Innovation and Technology. So we're going to go ahead and jump right into everything today. I do have a couple of my colleagues who you might be very familiar with. They're both currently culinary demonstrators here at the Charlotte campus. I have Chef Austin Vanetti, who will be assisting me during the demo portion of this session. And then I also have Chef Jeff Harris, who will be behind the scenes, kind of answering questions as we go, helping me with calculations so I don't have to toggle back and forth. So as I mentioned, today our focus is going to be on breaking down recipe development and costing. And in my opinion and most chefs' opinion, this is one of the most important parts of the industry. This is one of those areas that you definitely want to make sure you have knowledge of, because you could be the best chef in the world and literally have people lined out the door to eat your food every night. But if you don't have that costing correctly and you're literally losing money on every single customer that comes into your doors, things are not going to go very well. The good news is basic recipe costing is not difficult math. You're not using calculus or anything like that. So once you kind of have the basics down, then you can start to branch out and add more and more detail. So we're going to start off talking a little bit about developing recipes and why we develop recipes. Of course, we want to make sure that our offerings for our customers are changing with industry trends. As you all know, this is an industry that is constantly evolving, constantly changing. New ingredients are being introduced. Ingredients maybe we hadn't thought about in 10 years are coming back into popularity. So that's one of the reasons we will develop our recipes in the industry. We will also spend time revamping our existing recipes. Things are going to change from time to time, whether that's your ingredients, your skill level of your employees. As they increase their skill level, you're going to be able to maybe introduce some more complex recipes or procedures within your existing ones. Accommodating changes in technology and, again, product availability. If you have an item on your menu that's only available for 2 months of the year, do you really want that on your menu? Is it a big enough seller for you to keep that on your menu for just 2 months? Or would it be something better to replace that with that you can keep on your menu for a longer period of time? Cost and operational efficiency, again, as I've mentioned, that is one of the most important things. So you want to make sure when you're developing your recipes, you're keeping in that mind as well. And then, of course, customer demand. We want to make sure we are developing our recipes that are going to be good sellers, and also either revamping our existing recipes or removing them from the menus for those items that are not seeing that customer demand. And then, of course, our innovative new menu items. A majority of restaurants, you're not going to see the same items over and over. If you go there, twice a month for a year's period, you're going to see some new menu items, and that's to keep people interested and keep them coming back. So we're going to talk a little bit about the process of developing your recipes. Of course, the first step, you want to develop the actual ingredients themselves. And things you want to consider when you are developing these ingredients is the ingredient ratio. So you want everything to balance with each other. You don't want too much of something that's sour or too much of soft foods. You want to make sure your ingredients are ratioed. You want to keep in mind your customer base. Are you going to be using foie gras if you're in a small little town that has 2,000 people? You may not have the customer base to warrant a recipe with that ingredient in there. Again, talking about availability of seasonal ingredients, that's something we want to keep in mind. As chefs, we always want to use the freshest, ingredients that are in season, but we also have to keep in mind they have a season. So there's going to be points of the year we either may not be able to get that ingredient at all, or even if we're still able to get that in the off season, it may not be the quality that we're used to. Sensations, color, taste, texture, those all come into play. So when you're thinking about your ingredients, maybe you have a bowl of fried rice and you want to add some texture to it. So if all of you have in your fried rice is some seared chicken, the rice itself, some soy sauce, and the fried egg, that dish is going to be kind of brown, right? Everything's brown on brown on brown. Whereas if you add in some carrots, some green peas, some toasted black sesame seeds, that is not only going to add color, it will also affect the taste and the texture. Once you have your recipe ingredients kind of determined, then you want to think about the method of preparation. So I know me personally, as I am developing any recipe, whether I'm developing it for a restaurant, for a demo in the classroom, or just developing a new recipe to try out at home, as I'm writing that recipe out, I'm visualizing what I'm going to be doing, and that's how I type out each step of the method of preparation. Once you kind of visualize that process and start to get it on paper, you need to ensure that sequence is accurate. If you are working with a recipe and you need to boil potatoes and you don't put your the note of that process until your fifth or sixth step down the road, but you didn't say in step one to heat the water to boiling, you're going to have to wait 20 minutes to get that water up to temperature. So again, you want to visualize the process and then ensure it makes sense as far as the sequence goes. You want to keep your methods and procedures fairly simple, requiring minimal effort and easily replicated. Again, that's going to vary whether you're developing this recipe to make at home or if you're developing it to use in a restaurant that you might have to make 100 portions of that one dish every single night. So you want to make sure the method is going to be simple enough that you're not going to have to worry about adding increased time with that procedure. And then you also want to keep in mind your training procedures, your staff, as well as your equipment availability. If you have one mixer in your entire kitchen and 10 of your ingredients require the use of that mixer, that's something you want to consider as well. And then once you have got your ingredients and your method of preparation complete, then you also want to consider how is this dish going to be served. Of course, we all know presentation impacts taste, but we also want to remember and consider our plating and packaging procedures. If you, again, are selling a dish 100 times a night and it takes you literally 10 minutes every time to plate that dish, that may not be a dish you want to have in your restaurant. Also, if you are a restaurant that serves food to go, is that dish going to be able to easily be packaged in a to-go format? Moving right along, once we've got to this point, then we're going to think about the name. What do we want to call it? And believe it or not, there is kind of a science and a method behind developing a menu name. So first off, you want to be descriptive and catching. Again, that's the point of that menu name, is to kind of catch the attention of the customer. But you also want to be accurate and truthful. One example of that is, say, prime rib. If you're serving prime rib in your restaurant, on your menu, you need to be serving a rib roast that is prime grade. If you're not buying prime beef, you technically can't call that a prime rib. It would need to be labeled as a standing rib roast. You want to be complimentary of the recipe ingredients and methods. So maybe, for example, you have a farm fresh salad and you really highlight all of the local ingredients that you're getting from local farms. That's a selling point, and that complements the recipe itself. Unique recipe traits. This could be something like a 36-hour slow roasted short rib. So there again, just the fact that that chef has taken over 36 hours to produce that recipe, you're going to be interested. You're going to be intrigued, and that might cause you to order that. And there again, if you just had it labeled as roasted short ribs or braised short ribs, you may not have that attention grabbing that you're looking for. And then, of course, some restaurants do have themes. For example, you might be looking at like a hard rock restaurant where they kind of name their recipes and their menu items after, musicians and singers. So that's something you consider as well. And then the final step of the recipe development process, once you have kind of gotten all of that on paper, you need to standardize the recipe. And we're going to talk more about that in just a moment. But the most important part of standardizing your recipe is testing it, adjusting it, testing it again, and just keep repeating that over and over again until you get that recipe perfected. If you need to, you can adjust the yield. Most of the time when you're working in restaurants, you're not going to test a brand new recipe for chili and make 8 gallons of it. You're probably going to start off making, say, 1 gallon. Once you get that worked out, then you can adjust the yield to take it from a 1 gallon recipe yield to a 8 gallon or a 5 gallon recipe yield. And then once you get all that taken care of, then you want to finalize the recipe and convert it to a standard recipe format. The benefit of that standard recipe format we're going to talk about here. When you're working with your standardized recipes, you want to keep in mind that a standardized recipe should always be considering your skills of your staff, your training procedures, and also turnover. If you have staff that, is turning over on a basis higher than you would like to see, that's something you want to keep in mind because all of your staff are going to have to be trained and retrained on these recipes. As you have tested, adjusted, and retested and finalized, you want to make sure that recipe is producing consistent results. So once you've standardized it, you want to do tests from time to time. That could be a set test that you've designed specifically just to make sure that recipe is still where it needs to be. Or you could just on a weekly basis, just as a chef is preparing it, just kind of overview and make sure that it's still producing the consistent results that you not only need, but your customers demand. And then once all of that has been taken care of, you definitely want to, make this legwork as easy as possible when it does need to be re-updated. So most restaurants today that are utilizing standardized recipes are going to maintain those in some type of print, but more commonly, you're going to see them held in electronic databases just because that's the way everything is. Technology, as that increases, it just makes things easier and easier. And then, of course, the benefits of a standardized recipe, it's going to help you minimize waste because if your employees know exactly what they need to do, exactly how it needs to be prepared, that's going to minimize that waste factor. It's also going to prevent staff independence. I know one of the restaurants I worked at many years ago, one of the first restaurants I worked at, we had a woman that worked with us. She was up there in age, and she literally worked about 10 hours a week, and all she would do, she made all of our soups for us. Well, she started to have some health issues and could no longer do that. Meanwhile, we had built up a lot of our lunch crowd. They were there for soups. So when that staff member ended up having to, leave her position, we didn't have those recipes. We couldn't replicate that. And I'll be honest, I don't think she even had recipes. She had been just making these soups, and that was her thing. She didn't necessarily use recipes. She just knew how to make food taste good. And that's great. But there again, once she left, we had no soup recipes, and we had to kind of start everything from scratch. It's also going to save time, and that's a very important factor. We always say in this industry, especially, time is money. So these standardized recipes are going to help you with that as well. And then, of course, it's going to eliminate that guesswork with a non-standardized recipe. When you are working with new employees or retraining employees, it's also going to help that training procedure as well. And then our standardized recipe components. This, of course, will vary from establishment to establishment, but your basic standardized recipe, of course, is going to want to include the menu name, the yield, so how many servings or what amount that recipe is going to make, the portion size. So if your standardized recipe is, again, for chili that makes 1 gallon, how many portion size are you going to get out of that 1 gallon recipe? Your ingredients. And as far as the ingredients go, whenever you can, you want to use consistent measurements. You want to try to avoid having recipes that include ounces and gallons and tablespoons and all of that. So as consistently as possible is preferred. Specificity is important. And what I mean by that, your wording it matters. Say, for example, your recipe calls for pecans. 1 cup of pecans. So if you write the recipe to say 1 cup of pecans, comma, chopped, that's going to be 1 cup of chopped whole pecans, or excuse me, 1 cup of whole pecans that you're then going to chop. Whereas if the recipe is written as 1 cup of chopped pecans, that's a different amount. So you want to have them pre-chopped before you measure that out. And that's where you need to make sure you're very, very specific. But also you want to train your staff on how you write recipes. Everybody kind of writes them differently. So that's an important factor as well. You want to try to avoid non-descriptive terms. And what I mean by that is things like as needed, to taste, because there again, everybody's taste is different. Some areas where you might see season to taste is like the last step of an ingredient of, let's say, an entree. You want to season that steak to taste. And that just typically is going to mean just make sure you've got that extra little bit of seasoning right on top to finish out the dish. But as much as you can avoid those non-descriptive terms as possible, the better. Your standardized recipe, of course, your method of preparation that you have developed during the recipe development phase. Some optional things that some establishments might include will be an equipment list. This is very handy if you include right on the section of your recipe exactly what they will need to prepare that recipe. It just makes picking the equipment much easier. You're not going to have to keep going back and forth from the kitchen to where you store all your pots and pans and soups and ladles. So that's always very handy. Temperature chart and other potentially hazardous information that can be included. Costing information, so after you've costed out the recipe, you can include that. Nutritional information, you probably won't see that as often because that's something you have to typically have professionally done. You might see that in more of your chain establishments, your larger volume places where they have the resources available to provide that information. And then some may choose to include some type of plating diagram. Again, the more information that is on these standardized recipes, the better. It's just going to make your production staff their job easier and easier and easier. All right, so now we're going to kind of segue into the fun part. By a show of hands, you can either raise your hand if you're on camera, or you can use the little emojis. Who in here thinks math is fun? Am I the only one? I might be the only one. Me personally, I have always been a math guy, but there again, I like my basic math. I'm not a big fan of calculus and geometry. Fun fact, when I was in high school, I did fairly well with algebra, but for some reason, I just didn't understand geometry. So that was one of my weaker subjects in the realm of math. And I'm thinking to myself, I want to be a chef. When am I ever going to use geometry? Well, believe it or not, when I was in my Introduction to Baking and Pastry Arts course here at Johnson & Wales, and we were doing our cake designs, we had to use a little bit of geometry designing that cake on paper to make sure everything was going to work out. It was going to be structurally sound. So there again, we're not going to have to use calculus over the next few minutes for our basic food costing. So first off, I want to go over some of the important terms that you're going to hear me use over the next little bit of time here. So that way you kind of have an understanding of what I mean when I use those terms. So first off, as purchased, and that pretty much means exactly as it sounds. That is the amount of the food item as you purchased it from your distributor. So that's going to be before you cut it, before you trim it, before you do any cooking. That's literally how you receive it in through the door of your restaurant from your distributor. The edible portion, there again, is going to take your as purchased amount, any type of preparation, whether that is cutting off the ends of carrots or peeling an item, that is any amount of food item that is left to be cooked after that preparation has taken place. Usable trim. This is going to be any piece removed from an as purchased product that can be used in a different way. Say you want to do a vegetable platter for a catering you're doing, and on that vegetable platter you want to use broccoli, but all you really want as far as the broccoli goes on that platter is the florets, you know, what people are going to eat. So you're going to need to remove all of the stem from those broccolis. Well, that stem, some people might throw it away, some people might compost it, but that can be used. We could take that and boil it and make like a broccoli stock, and then use that broccoli stock to have a broccoli and cheddar soup. But again, anything that can still be used, even though it may not be served in that whole form, that would be considered usable trim. On the opposite side of that, we have non-usable trim. That's really going to be any piece from an as-purchased product that just really doesn't have a use. Just off the top of my head, I think of like some of the fat and gristle from a steak that you might trim, or a chicken breast that you might trim. You're not really going to serve that. Sometimes you can use parts of that for stock or something like that, but a lot of that you're typically going to serve, or not serve, but consider non-usable trim. Your yield, that is going to be the number of servings or amount a recipe makes. We could also use yield as far as our as purchase. So once we've done all of our preparation, that yield is going to leave us our edible portion. Portion size, so if our recipe yields 6 ounces and we're going to serve each person 3 ounces, that would mean our portion size is 3 ounces and it's going to yield 2 servings. So again, the portion size is the individual amount that serves one person. And then last but not least, our portion cost. So that's going to be the cost of, cost per serving of food. So basically, we're going to divide the total recipe cost by the number of portions that recipe makes, and that's going to give us our portion cost, which is going to be very important as we proceed here in just a few moments when we get into the math side of things. So talking a little bit more about as purchased and edible portion, some of your food items in the kitchen, they're going to be 100% edible. But a lot of times your vegetables, your fruits, your meat products, they're oftentimes not going to have a 100% edible portion, because you are going to have to peel things or cut off the ends or remove blemishes. Whereas things like bread flour, that's 100%, right? You're going to be able to use 100% of that product. So as we're thinking about that, we want to also consider our edible portion in food costing. And that's something, as you get better and better about food costing, that's one of the areas that you can then start to add that information in. But first, you really want to kind of get the basics down, and that's what we're going to focus on today. But again, is your edible portion is going to yield less than your purchase, you want to factor that into your food cost. And then your training procedures of your kitchen staff. There again, a lot of things we're talking about. Your training is important to maintain your food costs. For an example, I'm going to use carrot as an example again. Say you have a chef in your kitchen, and the kitchen that they worked at before that, they were trained to peel a carrot by taking 2 layers off all the way around, where most people are just going to take 1 layer off all the way around that carrot. Well, they're going to probably use that same method. That's what they were trained to do. So now in your establishment, they're taking 2 layers off of every carrot, and that's going to affect your edible portion. And then a lot of times, once establishments start to kind of factor in and develop what these yields are, they're going to oftentimes keep some type of chart or database, and that's going to make this process easy, because once you've got the yield of a carrot, that yield is going to be fairly consistent from time to time. It might vary a percent or 2, but usually it's not going to vary that much. But say, for example, if you get a case of carrots in, and for some some reason they have really thick skin and you have to take 3 or 4 layers on, and you're starting to get case after case after case like that, that's when you want to maybe revisit that database that you're maintaining and update that yield percentage. All right, so here's a little bit of an example to talk about what we've just spent the last few minutes with as purchased versus edible portion. So let's say, for example, you purchase a case of carrots from your distributor. That case of carrots is 20 pounds. But after you get that case of carrots into your restaurant and you have your prep chefs peel the carrots and trim the ends of the carrots and remove any blemishes, you have 16 pounds remaining. So you already know, just off the top of your head, you've already lost about 4 pounds of your carrots. So the formula for this is going to be to take your edible portion weight, so that would be our 16 pounds, and divide that by your as purchase weight, which is 20 pounds. So if you take 16 and divide that by 20, that's going to give you 0.80 or 80%, meaning for that case of carrots, you have about an 80% yield of edible portion. So now let's take that a little bit further. You have a recipe for carrot ginger soup. That soup calls for 10 pounds of carrots. So using that yield percentage that we just developed of 80%, how many pounds of carrots should we order? Because remember, if we order a 10-pound case, we're not going to yield 10 pounds after we have that processing of the carrots themselves. So the formula for that is going to take your edible portion weight. You're going to divide that by your yield percentage, which gives us 10 pounds of carrots divided by 80%, 0.80. That means instead of ordering a case of 10 pounds of carrots, we really need to order at least 12.5 pounds of carrots to make sure we have enough for that recipe. So now we're going to go ahead and transition into a live demonstration of that. I'm going to ask my colleague, Chef Austin Vanetti, to step behind us into our demonstration kitchen here on campus. And I'm going to have Chef prepare or do a little bit of the prep work for one of the ingredients we're going to be utilizing for our recipe today. So what he has behind him is 1 pound of Yukon Gold potatoes. We've already weighed them out. So what we want to do is have Chef Austin go ahead and peel our potatoes. And once he does that, he's going to weigh the peel, and we're going to utilize that to develop our edible portion percentage, yield percentage of the potatoes that we'll be using today. So as you see, he's using his Y peeler to just take 1 layer of the potato. There again, if he was trained to take 3 or 4 swipes every time, we're not going to have a lot of potato left by the time he gets done with it. But as he was trained, he'll take 1 layer off and gather up all of our potato peels, and we're going to weigh them on our electronic digital scale. There's all sorts of scale opportunities and different models and varieties. Most people are going to like your digital scales because they're very easy to tear, very easy to maintain and clean. But again, if it's something in a bake shop, you may see your traditional baker's scale, which are going to be much more useful in that setting. So as we're going right along, looks like we are nearing the end. What are we at now, as of right now, Chef?
We are at 0.30 ounces.
0.30 ounces. So it looks like we'll probably be at about, I'd say, ½ an ounce, just gauging off the top of my head. So Chef Jeff, if you will do the calculation for me, we started out with 1 pound of Yukon Gold potatoes. It was actually 2 potatoes, but equaled 1 pound. So we're going to go ahead and convert that to ounces. So we have a total of 16 ounces of Yukon Gold potato to start. And we are at
0.60.
Okay, so we're just going to make the math easy. We're going to say ½ an ounce for our purposes today. So using our formula, we're going to take our new weight, which is going to be 15 ounces, or 15.5 ounces, sorry. And we're going to divide that by 16 ounces. And that is what, Chef Jeff?
15.5 ounces divided by 16 ounces is equal to 0.968.
All right, so 0.968, we're going to round that up to 0.97. So we have about a 97% yield percentage on the potatoes that we're using today. So with a yield percentage that fairly low or that close to 100%, most chefs are not going to factor in the yield percentage as far as the peels go as cost, but they will use that yield percentage to make sure they are ordering enough. All right, so now that Chef Austin has peeled our potatoes, what I'm gonna have him do is just go ahead and chop those or dice those into a large dice. And then once he has all of our potatoes in a large dice format, we have a pot of boiling salted water that is ready to go for him. I'm gonna have him just put our large diced potatoes in that pot of boiling water. We're going to boil those for about 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, Chef Austin will go ahead and drain them and run them under some cool running water. So while he's working on that, we're going to continue on with our lesson, talking a little bit more about yield conversion.
What are you doing? I got 3 kitchens going. I got brisket going at Newman's. I got Kugel working at Mrs. Sanfino's, and this is Kreplock. Yeah. Try some of this.
No, I don't want to.
Eat. Your skin and bones. Huh?
Oh, this is awful.
Oh, Jerry. It's Kreplock. It's an acquired taste, yeah. Oh, that's now.
Did you follow the recipe?
The recipe was for 4 to 6 people. I had to multiply it for 183 people. I guess I got confused.
Tastes like dirt.
Well, I also dropped it on the way over. Trouble, I got no skills. I can't peel, I can't chop, I can't grate, I can't mince. I got no sense of flavor, obviously. You know, I got.
So with your yield conversion, this is a mathematical formula that restaurant professionals are going to be using to convert recipes from the amount produced to the amount needed. So there again, the yield conversion, it will increase the overall total cost of the recipe ingredients. Say, for example, your original recipe was written to yield 4 portions, and that total recipe cost was $2. But we want to now yield that recipe to make 8 portions. So your recipe cost is now going to be $4, but we're going to divide that by 8 portions. So although your recipe ingredients for the total recipe will increase, your cost per portion, sorry, I can't talk today, should always remain very, very close. It might differ by a half a cent or a penny that here and there, but it should be very, very close. So here's an example of that. Your restaurant has a standardized recipe for mashed potatoes. That recipe has been standardized to yield 32 portions. Well, you have agreed to cater a dinner for one of your regular customers that comes in quite often. They love your food and they're having a special event and they want you to cater that event. But you're actually going to need 92 portions. So how are we going to determine what recipe amounts to need for that newly converted recipe of 92 portions? So the formula for that is going to be our desired yield, so how many portions we want, and we're going to divide that by the original yield of the standardized recipe. So for this example, we have our desired yield, which is 92 portions. We have our original yield of 32 portions. We're going to divide that, and that's going to give us 2.875. You'll see most of the calculations we utilize in food costing, we're going to round to 3 decimal places. So that 2.875 is then going to round to a yield percentage or a conversion factor of 2.9. What does that conversion factor mean? Basically, we're now going to use that conversion factor to determine how much or how many ingredients we now need to order for that converted recipe yielding 92 portions. So for our mashed potato recipe, it calls for 16 pounds of peeled potatoes. So now that we want to make this same recipe, but for 92 portions, how many pounds of potatoes will we need for the converted recipe? So we have our formula. We're going to take the recipe ingredients, and we're going to then multiply that by our conversion factor of 2.9, giving you that new yield percent. So for this recipe, and I apologize, my screen is blocking. So it would have been 16 times 2.9. I'm sorry, what was the exact measurement on that? My little toolbar on Zoom is blocking my answer.
1 second. 16 times 2.9 is equal to 46.4.
46.4. So again, to make this recipe for 92 portions, we're going to need that 46.4 pounds of peeled potatoes instead of the original amount of 16. And there again, as I've mentioned, this is basic math. So you can just kind of almost do the math in your head. Your conversion factor is almost times 3, right? So if we needed 16 pounds times 3, that's almost 45. What is that, 48? So again, we're pretty close, but again, we want to be as exact as possible. So typically when I'm doing that, I'm just using that to make sure the math in my head kind of makes sense, where in this case, it does. All right. So now we want to talk a little bit about converting units. And this is going to be important when we have our food cost examples here in just a few moments. So your restaurant professionals are going to use this basic math. Again, we're using basic math, not using calculus here. And also general industry knowledge to convert our as purchased units to our recipe units. So we're going to take it from the amounts we bought from the purchaser, and we're going to convert it to the recipe units that we're utilizing in that standardized recipe. And again, for the most accurate conversions, most chefs will typically want to convert to volume for liquid ingredients, and then weight is going to be best for your solid ingredients. And the benefit about using weight is a pound, no matter what ingredients you're using. So if you need a pound of flour and a pound of pecans, that's going to be a pound. Whereas if you measured out a cup of flour and a cup of pecans, that's probably going to weigh differently. So there again, the weight is kind of the most popular and most accurate in the industry. So as an example, our recipe calls for 5 ounces of milk. We ordered a case of milk from our supplier, and the milk that we order, it comes in a case with 4 1-gallon jugs, and that case costs us $8.79. So using this information, we want to determine how much that milk would actually cost just for the amount that we're going to use in that recipe. So first off, we want to convert our as purchased unit to the recipe unit. So as purchased was in the form of gallons, and our recipe unit is in ounces. So fairly easy enough. First off, you need to determine how many ounces are in a gallon, right? So we should all know, if you've ever made your gallon man in your classrooms, which I think we all have, I even did that when I was in high school, you should be able to quickly determine that 1 gallon is 128 ounces. So now that we have converted it from the as purchased unit to the recipe unit, we're going to move a little bit further. We ordered a case of milk that had 4 1-gallon jugs in it. So we need to take that into consideration. So we didn't get 128 ounces of milk. We actually received 512 ounces of milk. Then we're going to use that information to determine the cost per unit. And that formula is going to be your as purchased price divided by the number of converted units. So in this example, our case of milk cost us $8.79. We received 512 ounces of milk in our 4 gallons, and that is going to be equal to 0.017 cents. So finally, we're going to determine the recipe ingredient cost. So for that formula, we're going to take the cost per unit that we just determined, and we're going to multiply that by the 5. Excuse me. So we're going to take the cost per unit, that 0.017, by the recipe amount needed, and that is 5 ounces. And Jeff, if you can do the math for me, sorry, my toolbar is blocking me once again. So we're going to go 0.017 times 5.
And the answer is about 8.5 cents per ounce.
8.5 cents per ounce. So there, I'm sorry, 8.5 cents for the 5 ounces that we're using. Yeah,
correct.
sorry, yes. So about 8.5 cents for the amount of milk that we're using in that recipe. We're then going to use that information here in just a few minutes when we jump into our Excel spreadsheets. So we are going to, before we jump into the actual costing portion of the presentation, I want to talk about one last thing we want to consider when dealing with food costing, and that is the Q factor. And you might be thinking, well, what is the Q factor? What does that mean? What does Q stand for? Most food service establishments are going to use the Q factor to kind of take into account any hidden cost for recipe production. And what I mean by that, those hidden costs, that could be small amounts of seasonings that you utilize in your recipes. That could be, say, for example, the water that we use to boil our potatoes in. We didn't really factor that into the recipe itself, or we won't, but we can keep that in mind when we utilize our Q factor. So that's just helping restaurants make sure they're taking into account those hidden costs. Because a penny here, a penny there, a dime here, a quarter there, all of those little amounts, they really do add up, especially in those higher volume restaurants. So the good news is establishments do have some flexibility in this area because every restaurant operates differently. So the good thing is you do have a little bit of flexibility when you're considering your Q factor within your food costs. Instead of a Q factor percentage, like many restaurants do, some chefs may add a certain dollar amount to each menu item. They may say, all right, we're going to take all of our salads and add a quarter, and that'll factor in, all of our hidden food costs. But before you do something like that, you want to make sure that quarter, that 25 cents for every salad sold, really is going to take care of those hidden costs. But some restaurants, some chefs like to use that just because it's a little bit easier, and then instead of having to factor in another percentage. So for today's lesson, we're going to focus on a 1% Q factor, and we're really just going to use that Q factor to factor in our very small quantities, such as any condiments and seasonings that we're using. But some of your average Q factor percentages, you can see to the right of your screen. Paper products are very expensive, and this could be to-go boxes. You might work at a very casual restaurant where a lot of your food is served on, paper plates or plastic plates of that nature. Any of your accompaniments, that's a higher number one as well. Condiments and spices, again, typically going to be about 1%. So some of your other kind of Q factor example hidden costs can include your table condiments. You sell a burger, you're not going to factor into the cost of what it costs you to make that burger, whether or not the customer puts ketchup on it. So you want to factor that in with your Q factor. Anything you serve a guest that you don't charge them for. This could be bread, it could be crackers, it could be the butter for the bread itself. Any type of plate garnishes, whether you put a sprig of parsley or a lemon wedge. It could be also, this is going back to any type of accompaniment. Say for your steak dish, you also serve a house salad or a cup of soup and a baked potato and some vegetables. You can factor that in also. And then, of course, Q factor is oftentimes utilized to consider waste. And that could be food that has spoiled if you accidentally ordered too much, or say something was burnt or overcooked. You can also factor in some Q factor just to take those into account as well. So we have kind of covered a lot of the topics that we're now going to kind of put into practice. But before I actually put our information that we've covered into practice using our Excel spreadsheets, I'm going to have Chef Austin come back up. It looks like our potatoes should be peeled and cooled off. So I'm going to have him go ahead and kind of start a little bit more on our recipe. And what I wanted to do as far as the recipe goes today, I wanted to do something very simple. again, I want us to focus on the very basic of food costing today. And there again, as you continue learning more and more, whether that's in your classroom or in the industry, that's when you can start to make these food costing spreadsheets and procedures more complex with additional information. So for our Italian potato frittata, we have already taken care of our 16 ounces or 1 pound of golden Yukon Gold potatoes, large dice. So for that, the next step, Chef Austin has our 6 large eggs that he has already cracked into our large bowl there. He cracked each one into an individual bowl and then dumped it into the large bowl, making sure we didn't have to throw away. What if we get to egg number 6 and dump it in and it's a bad egg? Well, now instead of throwing away 1 egg, we have to, instead of throwing away 1 egg, we then would have to throw away all 6. So now that we've got our 6 large eggs into the bowl, if you would just go ahead and take your whisk there, just kind of lightly beat these. We're really just trying to combine the yolks and the whites of the eggs. We're not really trying to aerate this too much for today's recipe. So once you have lightly beaten our large eggs, next up, we're just going to add in the rest of our ingredients, which is going to be a 1/2 ounce of Italian flat leaf parsley, which has been roughly chopped. We're going to add in 1 teaspoon of salt, as well as 1/2 teaspoon of ground black pepper. And then last but not least, we're going to add in our 2 ounces of Parmesan cheese. So if you would just go ahead and kind of whisk all of those together, kind of mix everything, combine all of our ingredients, and then we will take our eggs that we have already blanched off and cooled off. It was important to cool our cool our potatoes before we add them into our egg mixture, because then what happens? Our egg mixture starts to scramble. Again, today, to be honest, for our recipe, since we're going to be cooking this egg mixture anyways, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but some of those recipes, other than a frittata you might be working with, that can ruin the recipe. So something to keep in mind. All right, so now that we've got our egg mixture together, we've got our blanched potatoes. You can take and combine the two and just try to gently fold those into the egg mixture as best you can. We just don't want to break up our potatoes too much. We want those kind of nice, large dice pieces in there as we bite into it. Once you have that mixed, we have our cast iron skillet. We're using about an 8-inch cast iron skillet. We are going to heat that over medium heat. Once that reaches temperature, Chef Austin will take about 3 tablespoons of olive oil. We're going to add that into our cast iron skillet, making sure to cover the bottom of the pan and kind of like the first half of the edges of the sides of the pan as best we can. We don't want it to stick on us. And then once our pan is up to temperature and our olive oil has been added, Chef Austin will take our frittata mixture, dump that straight into the cast iron skillet. Once all of that is in there, he's going to take a spoon or a spatula and just try to make sure all of our potatoes are kind of into one even layer across the bottom of the cast iron skillet. Once that is done, Chef Austin will leave it on medium heat. We're going to go ahead and cover it, and you can use a pan cover if you have it. Most cast iron skillets do not come with one, so you can use like a sheet tray or another pan from another skillet you may have on hand. But we want to cover our frittata. We're going to let that cook on medium heat for about 10 minutes, and every once in a while you may see Chef Austin go back there and kind of jiggle the pan, might take his spatula and kind of check the sides of the frittata, make sure it's not sticking to the sides of the pan as well. So we're going to let that cook on medium heat, covered for about 10 minutes. Once we hit the 10-minute mark, Chef Austin will then take the lid off, and we're going to put it into a 400-degree oven for another 7 to 8 minutes, or until cooked fully through. All right, so Chef Austin is going to work on that for us as we move along through our examples. We've talked about everything that we really need to cover to successfully cost out this recipe. So now we're going to put this into practice. So to properly cost out our recipe, there are quite a few steps, but bear with me. A lot of these steps are very simple to do. So don't let these 10 steps or so make you think, oh my goodness, this is going to take forever. It's really very simple. So of course, step one, we are going to take our ingredients from the recipe and the amounts that we need for the recipe itself, and we're going to transfer those from our standardized recipe into our food cost sheet. Once we have everything transferred over, we're going to add in our as purchased from vendor amounts. Remember, this is going to be the quantities that we purchased from our supplier. Once we have that information, we want to have that in there before we move to the next step, because we need to know what units to convert to. So once we have our as purchased from vendor information, we're going to use that to convert it from the as purchased unit to the recipe unit. Step 4, we'll add in all of our vendor costs, and we're going to use that, that is total cost. So that is by the case or by the pound, however we receive that product. We're going to utilize that when developing our portion cost as well. We're going to use our vendor cost to calculate our unit cost. And that formula is to take our vendor purchase cost, which is what we paid the supplier, and we're going to divide that by our recipe unit. Step 6, we're going to calculate our ingredient cost, and that formula is going to be our unit cost that we just determined in step 5, and we're going to multiply that by the recipe amount needed, and that's going to give us what we consider our subtotal of recipe ingredients. Once we have our subtotal, we want to then, if we are going to be utilizing a Q factor, which we will today, our 1% Q factor, you want to factor that in with your subtotal. So again, don't factor it in before the subtotal, don't factor it in after the subtotal. You want to factor that in based on the subtotal itself. And then step 8, we're going to calculate the total recipe cost, which is going to be our subtotal plus whatever we calculate our 1% Q factor rate to be. And then step 9, we're going to use that information and we're going to take our division and we're going to take that total recipe cost and divide it by the number of portions, and that's going to give us our portion cost. And that's what we're going to then utilize to help us determine menu price. And that's going to be kind of the last step that we talk about today. So with that said, if you'll give me just a moment, I am going to pull up my Excel spreadsheet. We are going to start off the hard way. We're going to start off with an Excel spreadsheet with no formula. So I want you to kind of understand the math behind it before we make it a little bit easier on ourselves. And Chef Jeff, I may need your help on some calculations, so I don't have to toggle to my calculator. So let me just share my Excel screen. Everyone should see our recipe costing template on the screen. Some of you might be familiar with this recipe costing template. I actually got this template from a friend of mine who is also a Johnson Wales graduate, now a high school culinary educator. And I got the recipe costing template from him because I wanted to use something some of you might be somewhat familiar with. But keep in mind, you're going to see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of different variations of recipe costing templates. Some are going to be very, very simple and basic, and some are going to be very, very complex. So again, you want to find the recipe costing template that's going to fit your establishment best, or if you have the know-how, go ahead and create one yourself. So as we just discussed, our first step for our food costing is going to input the ingredients from our recipe into our food cost sheet. So I'm just going to go ahead and go straight down the recipe. Our first ingredient is Yukon Gold potatoes. Next up, we have our eggs, followed by our Italian parsley. Next up, salt, black pepper, Parmesan cheese. And you'll see a lot of times I'm doing something like cheese, comma, Parmesan. You might also see recipes called for potatoes, comma, Yukon. And that's really going to help for your databases. So if you keep a database of food cost or yield percentages, instead of trying to figure out if you need to look for Yukon Gold potatoes under the Y section or the P section, if you consistently use that method of potatoes, comma, Yukon Gold, potatoes, comma, russet, it's going to make it a little bit easier to find each ingredient. So again, that's going to be a determination you would want to make as far as what's going to work best in your establishment. All right, so we've got, I'm just going to abbreviate that just for time's sake. And then last but not least, we have olive oil. Okay, so now we have taken and put our ingredients from the recipe. Our next step, we're going to put in the amounts needed into the ingredients. So this is the amount needed from the recipe. So we're then going to move to column D. So for our Yukon Gold potatoes, we need 16 ounces. For eggs, we need 6 each. For our parsley, we're going to use ½ an ounce. We're going to do 0.5. Oh, it's converting, so. Okay, we'll just make that work. All right, so ½ an ounce, just so I don't get my calculations wrong. Then we're going to go ahead and add our black pepper, which is, our salt is 1 teaspoon. Okay. Followed by ½ an ounce of ½ a teaspoon of our ground black pepper. Our Parmesan is 2 ounces. And last but not least, our 3 tablespoons of our olive oil. All right, so we've already completed step 1. You see how quick and easy that was. Next up, moving on to step 2, we're going to add our as purchased from vendor amount. So we want to move over to column A here. And we're going to, column Z, and that's where we're going to put the information from our supplier. So I use this little chart right here. These are the costs that we paid from our vendor. So the amount that we received was 50, and that was in the unit of pounds. Next up, eggs. We ordered 15 dozen. Italian parsley, we received 2 pounds. Our salt, which I just caught a typo there. All right, our salt purchase quantity. We're not going to worry about salt and pepper today because we're actually going to factor that in with our Q factor. Our Parmesan, we received a case of 6 pounds. And then last but not least, we received olive oil for 1-gallon containers. All right, so now that we have all of that information, we're then going to use all of that to complete the next few steps. So step 3, we're going to convert from as purchase units to recipe units. So this is where we're going to convert that. So here we need to transfer everything from our column in column D, the amount needed. So this is what we want to convert to. Each ounce, teaspoon, which we're not going to worry about because we're going to cue that. Same here, teaspoon, ounce. And then for this, I did this on purpose. Typically, unless I'm writing home recipes, I would have this in a liquid volume. Off the top of my head, I know just because I've been in the industry for a while, a tablespoon of liquid is typically about ½ an ounce. So I'm going to go ahead and just convert that over into ounces, even though our original recipe called for tablespoons, and I wanted to do that to show you guys. And you all have a great benefit at the tip of your hands, also known as Google. So a lot of this work is done for you. If you simply Google how many ounces of olive oil are in a tablespoon, you can get a lot of these. Now you want to check a couple of answers, make sure you're seeing consistency. But if you see one answer that says, oh, it's ½ an ounce, and then another answer that says it's 3/4 of an ounce, then you may want to make sure you do the math yourself. But as long as you're receiving your consistent results, you should be fairly close. All right, so now that we've got all the units that we need, we're going to convert our as purchased into our amounts, our recipe units. So we ordered 50 pounds of potatoes, so we need to convert that to ounces. So Chef Jeff, most all of you should know, again, from your basic math skills and your basic conversions, we should know that there are 16 ounces in a pound. So for this math, we're gonna just simply multiply 50 times 16.
We have about 800.
800 ounces. So our 50-pound case of potatoes is actually equal to 800 ounces. All right, so our case of eggs included 15 dozen. So we know a dozen, it's not a baker's dozen, so we're not going to use 13. So our standard dozen is 12. So Chef Jeff, if you multiply 15 times 12.
180 eggs.
180 eggs. All right, our parsley came in a 2-pound case. We need to use ounces. So there again, we know there's 16 ounces in a pound. We just determined that from our potatoes. And this math I actually can do in my head. So we need 32, or we have 32 ounces of parsley. Typically, I will just kind of put a little notation. I might turn it red. I might do this column in a red color if I want to make sure we're focusing on that. But again, you can do whatever method works for you, just so I know that is going to be factored in with our Q. Our Parmesan, we ordered 6 pounds. We need to convert that again to ounces. So Chef Jeff,
96.
6 times 12 is... Oh, I'm sorry, 16 ounces. I'm off there. 16 ounces times 6 pounds of cheese. And that was the 96?
96
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I don't know where I got the 12 from. All right, and then last but not least, we've already kind of done this math in our earlier example. We determined there's 128 ounces in a gallon. We ordered 4 gallons, so we actually ordered 512 ounces. All right, now we're simply going to input our cost. Here, we ordered our case of potatoes for $25.49. Our large eggs were $16.32. Our parsley was $9.30. We're gonna Q-factor salt, Q-factor black pepper. Our Parmesan cheese was $29.40. And our olive oil, our case of 4 gallons of olive oil was $84. So now we need to develop our unit cost. So now that we've got almost all of our information in there, we're going to develop our unit cost. So Jeff, if I can have you do some more math for me. We ordered 800 ounces of potatoes, and we're going to divide that by our cost of $25.49. And just kind of round it up for me.
We are at $31.38.
No, we're dividing that. So 800 ounces divided by 25.49. Or sorry, 25.49 divided by 800. Sorry, if I'm doing this myself, it's easier. So $25.49 divided by 800 ounces. Sorry about that.
Oh, there we go. We are at 3 cents.
All right. Can you do 3 decimal places for me?
0.031.
0.031. All right. So next up, we have 180 eggs, and that case of eggs cost us $16.32. So 180 divided, or excuse me, 16.32, almost did it again, divided by 180.
0.090.
0.090. All right, so that means each of our eggs is about 9 cents. Next up, parsley. Our purchase cost of $9.30, and we received 32 ounces.
We are at 0.290.
0.290. All right, we're going to cue that. And our Parmesan cheese, we spent $29.40, and we received 96 ounces.
0.306.
306. And last but not least, we have our olive oil. We spent $84, and we received 512 ounces.
0.164.
0.164. All right, so now we just have to take those numbers we just created, do another round of simple and basic math. We are going to multiply 0.031 times the amount we need for our recipe, which is 16 ounces. So 0.031 times 16.
0.496.
0.496. All right, next up, 0.090 times 6.
0.54.
0.54. Next up, we have 0.290 times 0.5, half an ounce.
0.145.
0.145. Next up, these are Q factors, so we're not going to worry about them yet. We're going to do that math in just a second. Next up, we have 2 ounces of Parmesan cheese times 0.306.
6.53.
2940. Sorry, yeah, 0.306 times 2.
0.612.
0.612. And last but not least, we have 0.164 times 3. Or sorry, we're actually going to do that. We had converted that to ounces, so pardon me. Let me develop that. That's going to be 1.5 ounces. All right, so if you will, do 0.164 times 1.5.
0.164 times
1.5.
1 point is 0.039.
0.039. All right, so we now have accounted for all of our ingredients, the cost for the recipe itself, with the exception of our salt and black pepper. So now we can use our spreadsheet to add up these ingredients. I'm just gonna copy, actually, no, I can't, because again, my toolbar. So Jeff, one more time, we're gonna add all of these together. 0.496, 0.540, 0.145, 0.612, and 0.039. And that'll give us our subtotal.
Oh man, hang on 1 second. My calculator is
All right, I believe it should be 206 is the math I came up with earlier. All right, 2.06 is our subtotal. So now we're going to multiply 2.06 times our 1%. So if you will, 2.06, $2.06 times 0.01. And that should equal
0.0206.
0.02, which is 2 cents. So now we're going to add these. We are now on step 8. We've already calculated our Q factor. Step 8 is going to be our total recipe cost, which is simply adding our subtotal plus our Q factor, which gives us 2.08. So this recipe cost us $2.08 to make. So for everything that we needed, we spent $2.08. But this recipe was written to yield 4 servings. So Jeff, if you would, divide $2.08 divided by 4.
We're at 0.52.
All right, so we have done all of the work. Now, I know it's a lot going back and forth, but had I just been doing this myself, just right here in front of me, had my calculator handy, it's much, much quicker, just kind of going through. And as you do more and more cost sheets and do this over and over again, you're going to get faster and faster. But we have just spent the last, few minutes or so determining that our recipe cost is 52 cents. So at this point, we are going to move back to our PowerPoint slideshow. I do want to just real quickly pull up our food costing formula sheet with the formulas just to show you real quickly how easy. I'm just going to throw in some numbers. Our vendor cost was $25.49. We received, I think it was around 500 ounces. So there, all of that information, we've just put that in. The formula does the math. Once we put in our amount here, it's then going to move it right along. So there again, once you understand the basic math behind it, then you can move into your total portion cost. All right, last couple of slides. I know we are slightly just over our time. I do apologize about that, but I wanted to make sure we received all of the information. So I'm going to pull up my screen here and share our last couple of slides. So now that we have done all of that work to determine our portion costs, we're also going to use another piece of information, which is our food cost formula. Now that is a completely separate lesson, kind of going over developing your food costs, but your basic formula is your inventory. So the ingredients that you have on hand, plus any ingredients that you order. You're then going to subtract out what you have left over during that time period. Most restaurants are going to do this maybe on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. And then you will divide it by the amount of food sales within that same period. So just a quick little example. We have $20,000 in inventory. We purchased $2,000, giving us $22,000. At the end of the period, we took inventory again. We were left with $17,000. That gives us our ending inventory. Once we have our food sales of $15,000, we're going to utilize that to develop our food percentage by developing our ending inventory and dividing that by our food sales of $15,000, giving us a food cost of 33%. And that is typically the standard that you'll see most restaurants aim for. That's kind of the standard in the industry. But if you want to aim lower, aim lower. If you're slightly over, that's okay too. But again, around that 33% is where a lot of restaurants want to stay behind. So 33% food costs, we're now going to use that to help us price our frittata. So we have determined that our frittata cost us 52 cents per portion. So we're going to use that information, our portion cost of 52 cents. We're going to divide that by our food cost percentage, which would give us $1.58. So based on a 33% food cost, we should sell this for $1.58. However, that doesn't mean we have to. Would you guys sell a portion of this frittata for $1.58? Absolutely not, because I know I can get more than that. Now, if you are serving this at a diner and it's literally going to come on a styrofoam plate and a plastic fork and a napkin, yeah, you might want to serve it for $1.95 or $2.95. But if you're serving this in a restaurant, you can definitely get much more. So with that said, you have complete control as long as you're selling it for at least $1.58. That's what you need to make sure of. But you really have complete control as far as what you list that menu price up. So your factors you want to consider are going to be your total plate components. So if I were going to serve this frittata with a little side of fresh fruit, I need to consider that. I need to add in that additional food cost and redevelop my menu price. Your customer base. And their perceived value. They may not find that frittata valuable at $8.95, but they might find it a really good value at $5.95. So keep that in mind. Your competition, if you and a restaurant across the street both have ribeye steaks on your menu, but they're able to sell theirs for $15.95, but you have to sell yours for $17.95, that $2 difference really can have other people go across the street to order that steak instead of yours. But also the benefit is your menu pricing mix. You want to have a mixture of, lower priced items, moderate priced items, some higher priced items, because you're going to be dealing with a lot of people and different budgets and cost concerns, etc. But the great thing about having this flexibility is you are able to take some of your menu items that you make more money on, and I'll use that extra profit to lower the price on some of your higher priced items. Say, for example, that steak. Now, if we list this frittata for $6.95 a slice, we're making pretty good profit on every frittata slice we sell. Now we can maybe afford to lower the cost of that steak a couple of dollars and have a little bit more competition with that restaurant across the street. So there again, it's a science, but this is also an art. It takes time to understand the industry and how it operates. This is not something you'll necessarily learn overnight, but it is very, very important. All right, so like I said, I know I am a few minutes over. It looks like Chef Austin has completed our frittata. So he has pulled that out of the oven and went ahead and sliced up our frittata. Looks beautiful. Thank you so much for that, Chef. So now we know that slice of frittata costs $1.58. But that's so beautiful. I think we can get at least what, $5.95, $6.95 for that?
I was thinking 10. But I think we could go with
Hey,
that.
who knows if they'll buy it? Absolutely. But there again. So at this time, I've seen a couple chats come in. I'm not sure if those were questions. Feel free to unmute yourself or submit any questions in the chat. If you do not have any final questions, you are free to go. I do thank you so much for joining us for our session today. If there's anything else that myself or my colleagues here at Johnson & Wales University Charlotte Campus Admissions can do for you, not just as students, but also as educators, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. So again, were there any questions? Doesn't look like I see any coming through, anything come through the chat yet, Chef Jeff?
Nothing yet.
All right, well, I will go ahead and pop up my contact information. So I'll make sure that this is included with the information that you receive as well. So like I mentioned, if you have any questions, if I can assist you, or if you're a student and you're wanting to know more about Johnson & Wales or just the industry in general, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer those questions. But I do want to thank each and every one of you again for taking time out of your Friday morning. We appreciate it. I wish all of you the best of luck, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the academic year. Thanks so much.